Because he has been a civil rights giant for the entire nation. Mike served in the Maryland State Legislature, and he has a wealth of knowledge about the role that his dad played in the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Judge Kenneth LeVar Johnson is a retired judge from the Circuit Court of Baltimore City. He presently serves as the hearing examiner for the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission. Judge Johnson hails, I believe, from the great state of Mississippi. And to have an opportunity to sit down with Judge Johnson for just 5 minutes or so, you walk away with a tremendous amount of knowledge and you feel empowered, because Judge Johnson has a great story to tell, and he's also a great storyteller. So we're happy to have with us this evening Judge Johnson. Mr. Woody Grant is presently the Chief of Quality Assurance and Compliance for the Maryland Department of Education. He was also one of those individuals who was out on the front line. He was a partner with the Mitchell family in demonstrating, marching, a great activist, and he also has a story to tell, Mr. Woody Grant. And last, certainly but not least, probably now one of the most prominent attorneys in Baltimore City, and not just civil rights attorney, but attorney in the greatest respect of what attorneys should be about. Dwight Pettit's name is synonymous with championing the underdog. Dwight Pettit probably has a few bucks now, because he's won some big cases in the city of Baltimore. I mean, agencies are closing because of Dwight Pettit. Not fair. But he's a tremendous attorney, but he's the type of individual that's willing to give back. And I think that's why he jumped at the opportunity to participate in this forum this evening. So we're tremendously proud of Dwight. As a matter of fact, Dwight's dad was a plaintiff in one of the cases that really helped to frame what the Civil Rights Act of '64 has come to be about, and Dwight was the attorney for his dad. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. A. Dwight Pettit. And now, whenever you assemble a group like this, you have to have someone to sort of steer them along and keep them on track, because they just have so many stories to tell. We are fortunate tonight to have an individual, Dr. Raymond Winbush, who is the director of the Urban Research Institute at Morgan State University. I've had an opportunity to know Dr. Winbush now for a little bit over a year, and he never ceases to amaze me with his knowledge and also his sense of community and his sense of commitment. And if there's anyone who can keep these guys moving and keep us on time and send us out knowing so much more than we do when we came in, it's Dr. Winbush. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for the evening, Dr. Raymond Winbush.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know how I'm going to keep everybody, because I want to learn tonight, as I'm sure you do.
Excuse me, one second. I'm sorry. And I didn't realize we also have with us this evening City Councilman Kiefer Mitchell.
I'm going to postpone the funny story that I had about the Bush administration. The best thing to do is just go see Michael Moore's new movie, Fahrenheit 9/11. That's all I'm going to say about that. Don't do what they did to Linda Ronstadt. I don't know if you read that in Las Vegas a few nights ago when she dedicated a song to him, but she was put out of the hotel. That's a civil rights issue, I think. Put out of the hotel where she was performing the song. The professor in me says that this should be an interactive dialogue between the audience and our panelists. And the format, which will be very simple, is I want to give each one of the panelists 3 to 5 minutes to just share his story with the audience. I'll have a couple of trigger questions, and I want you to prepare yourself to ask questions so that we can have a dialogue going back and forth and not us just speechifying to you. I want to start by reading something that was written in 1868, and I wonder how many of us know what this is. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Does anyone know what that is? 14th Amendment, Section 1. And then one other thing, and then we're going to the panel. This was written in 1870. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. What is that? That's right, young brother. 15th Amendment. Those things. Give them a hand. So I think probably the first thing we want to do when we hear from the guest is to ask the question, why was a civil rights law necessary in 1964 when we already had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment? So why don't we begin here and just have each panelist talk about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll ask some questions. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I'm Ken Johnson from Southern Mississippi. The state's attorney there is from Northern Mississippi, and there's a difference. But we still homeboy, homegirl, and love her dearly. The passages that you read were from the Civil Rights Amendments after the Civil War was won. Before the Civil War started, and when the Constitution was originally enacted, Article 1, Section 2 said that blacks were to be counted as 3/5 of a person. Article 1, Section 9 authorized slavery to continue by the Constitution itself in the United States until 1808. So the Constitution sanctioned slavery, even though slavery was never ever mentioned in the Constitution itself. So what I call those two provisions that I've just quoted to you is the perpetual racial curse of the Constitution of the Founding Fathers that we had. Now, we glorify our Founding Fathers. They were very, very smart men, but they had limited ability to think of liberty and justice for all except people who look like them, rich, white, European males. So they took a civil war, almost 1 million people killed and wounded, to change those provisions in the Constitution. That is, Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 9. And then you had the 14th Amendment, due process, equal protection. And then the 15th Amendment, the right to vote. But before the 14th and the 15th, which was not mentioned, was the 13th. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. So it was necessary to pass the Civil Rights Act of '64 to undo what was done after the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, you had Reconstruction for a period of about 10 years. And that Reconstruction ended with the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. There was a gentleman named Rutherford B. Hayes who later became president, and a gentleman, Charles Tilden from South Carolina, who was running against him. Hayes was a Republican, Tilden was the Democrat. Tilden came within one vote in the Electoral College of winning the presidency. So he decided that he would rather end Reconstruction than to be president. So he made the ignoble compromise, the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, 1876. If you end Reconstruction, Hayes, I'll let you have the presidency. So that's exactly what happened. The ignoble compromise of the election of 1876. And the state that was in dispute, most of all, was, guess what? Florida. So that's how it happened. Reconstruction ended. Up come the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was started in Tennessee, and basically by a gentleman by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a slave trader, a slave owner, owned Begans, and he was illiterate, but he was probably the most smartest general of the Civil War, either on the Union side or on the Confederate side. And he started the Klan along with people in Pulaski, Tennessee, and the Klan terrorized us and terrorized us and terrorized us, and almost today they're not terrorizing us, but their ads are. So what the Civil Rights Bill of '64 did was to, for the first time, give meaning to Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 decision by the Supreme Court. And just yesterday, as an aside, I had an all-day meeting with Oliver Hill, who was one of the person who argued portions of Brown, along with Spotswood Robinson and Thurgood Marshall. And Professor Larry Gibson and I visited with him all day yesterday, and what a wonderful occasion. He's 97 years old and just as lucid as he can be, and he told us the story of how we overcame. And so that's what the reason was. The South lost the Civil War, so to speak, but the South won the Civil War. All except two of the Senate and the House committees were chaired by Southerners in the Senate. And Lyndon Johnson, along with Clarence Mitchell Jr. and some of my funnest days in my whole born life, was sitting with Clarence Mitchell, and he telling me stories about how the act was passed and how he spent the nights in the White House in the living quarters. And of course, you know that I was his younger brother Perrin's treasurer, campaign for a decade, and doubled as campaign manager. So I knew the Mitchells, I respect the Mitchells, respect the Mitchells, respect the Mitchells, and respect the Mitchells. So that's all I can say. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a nice segue to hear from Michael Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell.
I apologize for not standing and being a little slow. I was attempting to teach my granddaughter the finer points of soccer, and forgot that was maybe 35 pounds and 35 years ago. My college, the University of Pennsylvania, couldn't afford a football team, and our sport was soccer. And of course, many of Lincoln graduates went on to be national champions in Ghana and Nigeria and throughout the Caribbean. Incredible, as we sit here this evening, in the presence of a great cloud of witnesses, young people, because that's what Clarence Mitchell believed in. Clarence Mitchell was born in an alley, Stockton Alley, behind Pennsylvania Avenue, where they're starting to build these new homes. Well, that's where Clarence Mitchell Jr. was born. He was number 7 of 10. And there were no paved streets, no indoor facilities. And he, in essence, had to become the breadwinner at an early age for those siblings. He said he thought that he had eventually made it, and they moved to Pennsylvania Avenue, Bloom Street. He said they had indoor facilities, the streets were paved. He said, but as soon as he was marching in his baby brother, Perrin James Mitchell, and his baby sister Anna Mae Giddings and Elsie Mitchell, the neighbors next door said, look at him, because Clarence Mitchell had come from a situation where they were just making it, but yet had a presence and dignity about him. And they said, here come those alley folks, they're never gonna amount to anything. And Clarence Mitchell looked at his neighbors and said, oh yeah, I'm gonna show you that these alley folks are gonna amount to something. And he said, never look down on a child. Because out of little Stockton Alley came the first black congressman of Maryland, Perrin James Mitchell, and Clarence Mitchell Jr., who was counsel to presidents, starting with Roosevelt. I'm Mississippian too, Judge. I'm from the Delta, Madam State's Attorney, Carrollton County. That's my grandfather, my mother's father's county. And of course, in that Delta area was where Byron D. LeBeckwith was holding forth, and where my great aunt was born in Greenwood, Mississippi, was the hometown of Byron D. LeBeckwith, who assassinated Medgar Evers. So it is in my blood to protest man's inhumanity to his fellow man. And young people, you have something special. And it does not matter where you were born, what kind of clothing you're wearing now. Clarence Mitchell Jr., my father said, he thought he was going to show his neighbors that he was dressed up. He had put a couple of extra pieces of cardboard in his shoes to cover the hole. He only had a partial lace, but it's the desire within you. And that's a clarion call to all of us. And I brought a picture with me because Clarence Mitchell, as said, became a member of the Episcopal Church. And through the efforts of his being involved at Douglas High School, where his classmates were Cab Calloway, and then became Justice Thurgood Marshall. And then he met my mother there, Juanita Jackson, whose mother, Lily Mae Carroll Jackson, was really the fountainhead and one of the impetus for Clarence Mitchell to be involved. And talking about values and things of that, my grandmother on my maternal side, Lily Mae Carroll Jackson and Kiefer Albert Jackson, had a prescription: boys and books don't miss. Boys and books don't mix. Meaning to their 3 daughters, from junior high to high school, their boyfriends were the history textbooks, the biology textbooks, the English textbooks. At this juncture, I must recognize my family because this is Clarence Mitchell's living spirit. I see my daughter right in front of me, attorney Micah Michelle Mitchell. Micah, and the man who keeps me well, I'm out here is my doctor, Dr. Kiefer Jackson Mitchell Sr., who is our photographer as well. Councilman Kiefer Mitchell. I believe that's Senator Clarence Mitchell IV in the back with one of my great nieces, and I believe another great nephew. There are several others here. Clarence Mitchell III, there's Angela Mitchell, there's Joyce. There are a lot of them. We were prolific. I tell that to you because the essence of Clarence Mitchell was his family. He was a teetotaler. He didn't go to the cocktail parties in Washington. When President Johnson pulled out his bourbon and branch water, Clarence Mitchell drank water. He said, as much as we have against us, even though you're in the White House, and here I am, an African American, and although I'm sitting with President Johnson, I must remain completely sober. And he was part of, and that was because he wanted to court my late mother, Juanita Mitchell, and my grandmother was an old-fashioned Methodist, and there was no drinking, no card playing, no smoking. And Clarence Mitchell courted Juanita Mitchell from high school. He couldn't speak to her in high school. But from afar, he passed notes, and I told Billy Murphy, through Billy Murphy's grandfather, George B. Murphy, of the Afro. I mention that because he had inset within him this desire to educate his family, and although he worked around the clock, he worked with Thurgood Marshall on Gibson Island as the waiters, and he and Thurgood too, because a lot of times waiters with extra food left over, and you could bring food home to your family, but as a matter of principle, they refused to take extra items that were left behind, and conducted themselves that way from high school on in their waiting days. My commissioner, where did he go? He was standing out front. I have a box and a cast, everybody, and I was on my crutches trying to figure out how I was going to get in, but our liquor board commissioner held a parking space for me and is there helping to protect neighborhoods as well, because you young people don't need the flourishing of liquor establishments constantly around you, and that's what Clarence Mitchell believed in. The other thing that Clarence Mitchell believed in, and I could have grown up in a different area, and of course they had the means, although they worked for the NAACP and my mother was a civil rights lawyer. My father said, I was born and raised in Stockton Alley, and my family and my sons are going to grow up in the 1300 block of Druid Hill Avenue. He said, because I go to Washington every day, and I have to have a sense, if I'm fighting for people, to have a sense and feel what they feel and see every day, and can't afford the luxury to go to the suburbs. So that's why all of our friends were Melvin, Lou Melvin, and people like that. We couldn't help it. We grew up in the hood. But then we had a desire for freedom. And I tell you, young people, that if you have that insatiable desire, and I brought this picture of Clarence Mitchell, I know I have 2 more minutes. One, well, Clarence Mitchell's name, because he helped to defeat filibuster, I'm going to take 1 extra minute. But Clarence Mitchell, and you got to remember, young people, and Sun Papers reporters and people from wherever, don't fall apart. This has been happening since time immemorial. Clarence Mitchell Jr. was the grandson of Enoch Pratt, the founder of this library, who took one of his African slaves one night, and as a result of that union, had a child named Mary Pratt, who married his grandfather, Charles Albert Matthias Mitchell, and they lived right around the corner. We've been integrated a long time ago, folks. Clarence Mitchell, in his formative years at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the churches and other members of the community helped raise money so that he could attend college and get a first-rate education. But as he got there, who should be there with him but, and who knows the poet said, light for me ain't been no crystals there. Langston Hughes was a classmate. Judge Robert Carter, who argued the first of the Brown cases. Thurgood Marshall, they were a couple years ahead of him. And then he got this desire to be a part, we are part of the world, everybody. His roommate, who no one wanted to room with because he was Nigerian, but he was an Igbo. His name was Benazikwe, who was the first Governor General of Nigeria. He got his idea of Pan-Africanism a long time ago. And then when that crew graduated, no one wanted to have another young African from Ghana who said, Clarence, and sometimes that's where my name comes from. His nickname was Mike. He said, Mike, I'm going to be the head of my country someday. And Clarence Mitchell said, okay, he said, but no one wanted to room with this future African leader. And Clarence Mitchell roomed with him in Houston Hall. And that was Kwame Nkrumah, who believed and took Du Bois's dream of Pan-Africanism and made it real, establishing Ghana. And of course, our CIA helped overthrow him, and he ended up going to French Guinea and Sekou-Touré to end his years. But it was Kwame Nkrumah. So Clarence Mitchell, having come, remember now, from Stockton Alley to the presence of these people, and then to meet the presence. And I say you, as he believed, with God all things are possible. And more importantly, as Judge Johnson will tell you, that never get so uppity that you don't acknowledge people. People used to joke because my father would take his hat off and tip his hat to the people walking down the street, and always gentlemen on the street, someone who had had a nip or two, he would call them Mr. and ladies Mrs. He said, teach respect. Dwight Pettit, he is the reason, his case is the reason Thurgood Marshall never tried another case in Maryland. Judge Thompson was so arrogant and outrageous in Dwight Pettit's school case. And Judge Thompson told Thurgood Marshall he'd never amount to anything. And Thurgood said, well, I'll see you. Can't repeat exactly what Thurgood said. But you know the rest. Woody Grant, Harford County, longtime NAACP fighter, freedom fighter, gave of his time, his family. His wife, Janice Grant, was the plaintiff in the teacher desegregation suits in Harford County. He now is with the State Board of Education. And Judge Johnson, PJ's friend. We see each other out. PJ sends his love to you. He said, keep fighting. And normally he was there as a bedrock for parent. And your love, and know that this Civil Rights Bill of 1964 just didn't start then. And in answering your questions, we're going to deal with the whole question of the fact that Kennedy, they were not the sponsors and the authors of the Civil Rights Bill. Understand that, folks. And remember that if it were not for the Republicans in the U.S. Congress, there would have been no Civil Rights Bill. And understand it was not until LBJ became president and Jake Javits and Emanuel Sulla offered amendments to the then bill that the Kennedy people had introduced, did it evolve into the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But it started with the 1957 Voting Rights Act and the 1961 Civil Rights Act. Thank you very much.